Hello and welcome to Beyond Reproach. This is Tux Lurzel.
Stephanie Domingo.
We're over here drinking and swearing.
Yes.
We come to you from Bushwick, Brooklyn, where we record on land belonging to the Lenape Nation. A nation that is one of many that is still very much out here doing its thing, and we'd like to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Beyond Reproach is the show about scandals and scandalousness in American politics and government.
Show enough.
I love a show enough.
Yes, you do. Yes.
So Stephanie's story today, it has come to my attention.
What? Excuse me?
It's recently come to my attention that Stephanie's story today is from the Civil War.
It is.
So when I was trying to decide on a cocktail to make to go along with our story, I started by researching what we were drinking during the Civil War. The answer is mostly whiskey.
Yeah.
We were drinking a boatload of whiskey, especially the soldiers. So much whiskey was consumed, in fact, that the army actually had to ration whiskey and restrict how much the soldiers had access to. But even the generals and officers and everyone was crunk, basically.
Okay.
A lot of mistakes were made on both sides.
You don't say.
Because everyone was just fucking shit-faced the entire time. As the years went on during the Civil War, the supply of whiskey actually started to run out because they were drinking so much. And soldiers were forced to drink lower and lower quality whiskey and get their whiskey from like bootleggers. And basically, they weren't actually drinking real whiskey. They were just drinking whatever alcohol they could get their hands on.
Yeah. Because
both governments, the North and the South, both governments had to restrict how much grain could be diverted to use for distilling. Because they needed that grain for the war effort to feed horses and to feed people. So,
but they're like, but I want to get drunk.
Yeah. So they like literally had to be like, no, you can't make this much whiskey right now because we need that for other things.
This is what oppression looks like. Guys.
Exactly. The thing is, though, that most of the soldiers would have been drinking whiskey straight or maybe with water. But that's not really any fun. I mean, it's fun to drink, but it's not fun for us because I like a recipe. I want something that I can create and share with you guys and talk about.
They're like, this doesn't have any shaved nutmeg.
Yeah. Get out of here. Oh, the recipe for straight whiskey that I'm sharing with you. But luckily for me, the officers and the generals in the army could get their hands on better stuff. And they weren't just drinking straight whiskey. The soldiers were drinking this like bootleg stuff that was sometimes making them sick, sometimes even actually killing them because it was cut with weird shit. But the officers and the generals were drinking like fancy imported French brandy and that kind of stuff.
Wow. And
they were having themselves a time. One such general was General Ambrose Burnside from Indiana. When he was younger, when he was a young officer, before the Civil War even started, he was engaged to a woman named Charlotte Lottie Moon. And on their wedding day, the minister, when he asked her if she would take him as her husband, her answer was to reportedly shout, "No siree, Bob," and ran out of the church.
What?
Yes.
I love her. No siree, Bob?
Yes.
She had jokes and she ran?
Yes. So we don't know for sure why he was jilted at the the altar, but it probably had something to do with his wild ass facial hair.
Yeah.
This man had this. We'll post pictures of him on our Instagram because normally I wouldn't care enough about the history of somebody that inspired a cocktail to post a picture of him on our Instagram, but you need to see this. He has these wild, fluffy sideburns that sort of morph into his mustache, and the mustache is connected to the sideburns, but then his chin and his neck is clean shaven. It's madness.
Who told him he could do this?
I don't know, but apparently his facial hair was so distinctive and so unique to him, and like that was his look, that sideburns are named after him.
I was looking at that cocktail and I saw that and I'm like, and then I looked away because I'm like, I'm sure there's a great story behind this.
I mean, it's basically, his name is Burnside.
Yeah.
Sideburns, Burnside.
I fucking love it.
I know, yeah.
That's so good.
So the cocktail we're drinking today is...
in honor of him.
Yes, named after the same man that sideburns are named after.
So this is what he liked to drink?
So this is actually his recipe.
Oh.
That he liked to share.
A mixologist.
Yes.
Okay.
So he later moved to Rhode Island after being jilted at the altar. He became a weapons manufacturer before joining the Union Army. And then from there, he kind of just failed upward until he became
as
general.
you do as a white man.
Yes.
Straight white man, just getting all the way to the top by performing badly.
Exactly, yeah. He was so bad at his job that by the time he became general, he made some blunders as a general.
Did people die? Of course they did.
Yes.
Oh, fuck.
Lots of people died because of this man. His mistakes led to some crippling losses and really devastating defeats for the Union Army, especially at the Battle of Fredericksburg and the Battle of the Crater. At some point, I think actually multiple times maybe, he actually tried to resign from the army. And Lincoln was like, no, we need generals. So he was kind of just like shifted around. But
he doesn't even believe himself.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, I know I'm shit.
Oh, God.
Everyone else knows I'm shit.
Yeah, I'm sure they're not shy about letting him know.
Exactly, yeah. But his disastrous military career did not stop him from having himself a time as a general in the Union Army. He loved to drink. And he had this punch recipe that he wanted to share with everyone, and it later became famous and was named after him when it appeared in print. Mm-hmm. It doesn't actually have whiskey in it, even though I opened the whole thing talking about how whiskey was what everyone was drinking.
Liar.
But, the generals could afford better stuff, and that's great for me because I like to share a fancy recipe with y'all. So, today we are drinking the General Burnside's favorite. In 1863, Jerry Thomas said, "This superb drink was forwarded to me by special messenger from the general. It contains lemon juice, brandy, French VSOP brandy, Jamaican rum, orgeat syrup, hot water, and nutmeg."
Let's cheers it up.
Oh, yeah, cheers.
Cheers.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid at school learning the golden rule, teacher often used to say, if you don't tell a lie, there's not a reason why you can't be like Washington someday. How could Washington be a married man and never, never tell a lie?
Damn, okay.
That's good.
That is good. It almost reminds me of it feels tea-like.
Yeah.
Like a toddy.
Very much like a toddy.
Oh, that is incredible.
I know. Can we have another one before we start talking?
Ooh.
During the Civil War, and even before, this was some fancy shit.
Yeah.
This is made with French brandy, imported French brandy, imported Jamaican rum, and instead of everyday sugar to sweeten his punch, he's using this fancy French almond-flavored syrup called orgeat syrup, which we've talked about before on the podcast.
Yeah, I really thought the almond with the lemon and brandy was going to be odd.
It's great, though, right?
It's so good.
And even the nutmeg that you grate over the top before serving, it's really just there to be like, I'm fancy and I can afford nutmeg, so sprinkle, 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 here's some nutmeg on top. This was a way to show off.
Yeah, what a fancy motherfucker.
When I proposed this punch to Stephanie, she was like, don't you think it's weird that it's hot?
Yeah.
It's made with hot water and it's a punch.
It was hard to get ice, right, or something?
Yeah, back then it was really hard to get ice. You could only really get it when it was cold out.
What?
Unless you had an ice house, if you were rich enough to have an ice house to store your ice. There was all sorts of structures that were built.
House?
There would be a structure.
Like underground or something?
Yeah, it would be underground. They would stack all the ice together and cover it in sawdust to keep it insulated so that it wouldn't melt.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's ingenious.
Before ice was cheap and plentiful and easy to get, warm drinks were just kind of the norm. And in fact, a lot of punches were made with hot black or green tea as a way to dilute it rather than just using water because tea had more flavor.
Yeah.
So, back in colonial America and the early years in America, any big party that you went to or festive occasion always had a big bowl of boozy punch. That was just what people drank. Mm-hmm. In fact, cocktails were basically invented as a way to scale down a punch recipe for individual serving sizes. Cocktails came out of the fact that everyone was drinking punch all the time.
Okay.
By the Civil War, this was a century of drinking punch already, and punches were starting to feel a little bit old-fashioned, and they weren't really consumed as much, especially in high society. People weren't drinking punch as much, but they were still just the thing to get a crowd drunk.
Oh, yeah,
especially
of
at
course.
a party.
Yeah, the quantities.
Yeah, and people during the Civil War needed to get drunk.
Were lit, yeah.
So This was just the thing for the Civil War. And actually, a lot of famous punch recipes came out of the Civil War. There was actually another punch recipe that Stephanie and I were thinking about using.
The really potent one that had all of the alcohol?
Mm-hmm. No. This is not the only punch recipe that came out of the Civil War. But after the war, the popularity of punch continued to decline, and eventually cocktails became the drink of choice for Americans. But, back in the day, everyone was drinking punch, and a warm punch was just the thing.
This is delicious. I love it. I don't know why I thought it was going to be weird.
It's so good.
But I think it'd be even better cold. And I know
like that it's warm.
Do you? Yeah. Okay. Maybe that's just my own taste, because we're in a society where Cocktails are cold.
Yeah, totally. I'm shocked by how much I like this.
It's very, very delicious. So yeah, I'm gonna take it away with my story from the Civil War. So in March 1862, Union forces were already blockading the southern ports to prevent the export of cotton, because they were trying to hit the Confederacy where it hurt.
Sure.
In the bag. So they slowed down the money coming into the South to a trickle. 10% of what they would normally be shipping was able to get in and out.
Wow.
Yeah.
10%.
10%.
Wow.
So nothing. So around this same time, a weird ad began running in northern newspapers. An ad that promised perfect facsimiles of Confederate currency. They were marketed as, quote, mementos of the rebellion. And they were meant to be just rebel souvenirs.
Why though?
I'm going to get to that. So there are all these testimonials and things from different papers, because it was in most of the big northern papers. They were saying how high quality the images were and how low the cost was. I mean, who doesn't like some discounted money? So my scandal this episode is about Samuel Upham. Have you ever heard of him?
No.
Of course you haven't. Oh, I love this story. So he is the man who dunked on the Confederacy from the comfort of his downtown Philadelphia shop. But yeah, first a toast.
A toast.
We're going to do a toast.
Yes. Raise your punch glass.
Yes. To a war profiteer we can all get down with, because sometimes you have to print money to make money.
Oh, yes.
Your reaction was priceless. I love it.
I can't even take a sip because I'm laughing too hard.
Sometimes you got to print money to make money. Okay, catch up.
Now I'm jealous that your toast is better than mine.
Oh, whatever. Come on. So in late February 1862, this is just a year into the Civil War, Upham, he noticed that copies of the Philadelphia Inquirer were just flying off the shelves of his shop. He had a shop that sold, it was just a little storefront. It sold perfumes and pharmacy items, but mostly paper products.
Okay.
So stationery, envelopes, stamps, things like that, but also the paper. So it was the morning time and he was almost sold out. So he's just what the fuck is going on? So he finally stopped a customer and he asked hey, what's the deal? And the customer just pointed to the cover of the newspaper, which showed a really detailed copy of a $5 Confederate note.
Okay.
So the people of Philadelphia, this was the first time that they saw rebel currency, and they're just oh my God, it's the grayback. So the Union had greenbacks, obviously.
Yeah.
The Confederacy had graybacks.
Sure.
So they were just a buzz, because it was kind of a novelty, oh my God. They had heard that they had money, but, it's the first time that they're seeing it.
It was a novelty that it was just different from their currency, and how cute that they have different money from us.
Basically. It was definitely a cute factor.
Yeah.
Oh, look at them. They're trying.
They think they're a government.
Right? Yes. So it was a really detailed copy. So when Upham looked at it, all he saw was an opportunity. I'm going to talk a little bit about just Confederate notes in general, because I think it's really interesting and kind of fun. So when the southern states seceded, there was a massive money crunch, because most of their wealth, as we all know, was in people.
Yeah.
But the few people who did have currency, people who had gold and silver coins, they were just hoarding it.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, because it's okay, I have something of real value. No, I'm not giving this to anyone. In order to set up an independent economy that had a free flow of currency, banknotes, dollar bills, y'all. The Confederacy, they needed paper money. So they ordered a run of banknotes from the National Banknote Company located in New York City. These notes were of high value, And this was before the war kind of kicked off.
I was going to say, like, how is that not treason for this?
I'm gonna get into that. But this first run was of super high value. It's being made by professional engravers on copper plates, like stunning, like looks professional, like chef's kiss, like amazing, perfection. So these bills, they hit circulation in April 1861. So this is when the Confederacy, it was before they seceded that they ran these bills. So when they hit circulation, it was in April. So it was 2 months after the war had started.
That's so weird to me that, like, people knew that the southern states were printing their own money and nobody thought, like,
I guess the price was right. And, like, they printed a large run that hit circulation 2 months into the war.
Yeah, okay.
So things hadn't really, like, started yet, but they were kind of getting going. So 2 months later, in June, they ran out of money just in 2 months.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, can you print us some more? And all the New York printing companies were just like, no. Like, y'all's are rebels, and, like, we don't want to go to jail. Like, fuck y'all. Like, I don't want to do crime with you.
And also go fuck yourself. You're at war with us.
Yeah.
Like,
have you seen HBO's True Detective?
No.
The first season is really good. It has Matthew McConaughey, who I actually hate, but he has this really iconic line. He says, I don't have the Constitution for jail, which is like, duh, me too.
Yeah.
Like, you know, when truth hits you, like, I'm like, I too don't have the Constitution for jail. So yeah, these northern money makers were just like, no, don't look at us. We don't know you. We don't know you, girl. So the South, they had to make their own banknotes. So the second run was a black lithograph. Do you know what a lithograph is?
I've heard of it, but not officially.
Yeah, it's like it's a press that uses the properties of oil and water and ink. It like creates like almost a relief that's pressed into paper. Okay. It's really, really pretty in there.
Yeah.
You've seen lithographs. They're still around.
Yeah.
So their second run wasn't like super fancy. It was just a lithograph.
I mean, that's still fancy to me.
Yeah.
You know, they're not doing like silk screened money.
Yes. So it was on white paper, and like the ink would kind of rub off in your hands the more you handled it. Sure. So that's how they got the name grayback. Because it would kind of turn your hands gray the more you handled it. Okay. And it just became muddled and gray. Ooh. Well, it was during a war, and all of the good people making, money were in the North. So, they were doing it on the fly. They were using what they had. Sure. This was how they kept their economy afloat. But the grayback, unlike the greenback, was not backed by any hard currency.
Sure, yeah.
It was backed on a promise, basically. They did something similar during the Revolutionary War. There was a note on it that said 6 months after the ratification of a treaty of peace between the Confederate States and the United States, the Confederate States of America will pay like whatever the amount of the bill, let's say it's a $5 bill, to the bearer. Like it was an IOU, basically.
Okay, like a bond almost.
Yes, exactly, like a bond. So there was a lot of different designs because every state was producing their own, and it was actually the designs were really beautiful, really colorful. A lot of the earlier bills had mythological gods and goddesses, and there's this one really beautiful artwork of this like woman who's like naked riding a deer. Wow. And it's like, you guys were down with like multiple gods back then? Okay.
I never really looked into this. I've heard of people collecting Confederate money, and I always just thought like...
gorgeous.
I always just thought like, oh, like you're the same as the kind of people that collect like Nazi memorabilia. I never really thought of it as like there's actually like a reason to collect this.
It's artistic.
Wow. Okay.
Like the earlier stuff, definitely. As things went on, it became a little bit more mundane. There was mostly like ships, like naval ships, or historical figures. Like George Washington was on some of their money.
Okay. Just sturdy white men.
Yes, sturdy white men. However, there were bills that had happily working enslaved Africans. Just work in the field happily. Yes. As they do.
That's just how they are.
Yeah. This was back when we didn't have a problem with black people in currency.
I know. This is before Obama started the whole problem.
Before Obama invented racism. Yes. Okay.
So this is before the lost cause officially even started, and it was already starting.
Yes. So back to Upham. So the day that this paper hit, he ran to the Enquirer's office and he bought the banknote plate. And he printed that same day 3,000 copies on French letter paper of the $5 bill. And these bills sold like hotcakes. They were gone in a month. And as a form of insurance against any fraud claims, on the bottom of each bill, he included this like very thin strip that read, in small print, facsimile Confederate note. And it had his name and address on it.
Okay.
Because the real thing was very easily duplicated because they were just using a lithograph. Upham knew that many unscrupulous sorts might just take it upon themselves to use this as actual currency.
But you couldn't use Confederate currency in the North, could you?
No. So yeah, he had this disclaimer because he didn't want to go to jail, highlighting that this money was bogus, but it was designed in a way to be easily clipped off.
Uh-huh.
So once clipped by accident, of course,
yes,
you could use it as it was a near perfect counterfeit.
Wow.
Yeah. So after his first grayback print run, Upham rapidly expanded his inventory. He took out ads in newspapers promising to pay gold for more specimens of Southern money. He just wanted like, hey, if you have a $10 bill, like I'll pay you X amount of gold for it. Like I need it. 5 cents bought you one Confederate dollar. $2 bought you 100. $15 bought you 1,000 Confederate dollars. I mean, you could like buy your own stimmy.
Yeah.
You know?
If you wanted to like ride down to South Carolina and be like, I'm rich, bitch.
I mean, I'm going to get to that.
Yeah,
some
okay.
people did.
Wow.
Some people did. So,
Sorry. Damn. Yeah.
So there's a lot of different historians saying like, oh, he didn't mean to do this. Like he just wanted to create memorabilia, kind of tchotchke-like things. He sincerely perhaps thought that these reproductions were just like harmless souvenirs.
But who would need like 1,000 bills if you didn't plan to use them for something?
So before he was making these Confederate bills, he had this commemorative, he had a lot of like patriotic items that were kind of aimed at the South. Mm-hmm. Like he had this card that showed Jefferson Davis when you hold it one way, but when you turn it the other way, it's a picture of a jackass.
Amazing.
He made a meme before Twitter.
Yes.
It's so good. I'm going to put it in the show notes. It's like really detailed and it's phenomenal. I'm going to show you after. So in early 1862, many Northerners, they believed that the war was going to be so quick.
Yeah.
They thought they were going to be quickly crushed, so they wanted to buy these like kind of fun souvenirs like while they had them. So by the time Upham started buying ads, his like patriotic tchotchke business had really taken off, like from a little storefront thing to this whole like wholesaling enterprise.
Wow.
And like you said, no one needs thousands of dollars of fake money. Clearly these people aren't just buying it to like frame and put in their house.
If it's that convincing, like sure you're gonna fucking go to fucking North Carolina and be like, where's the nearest Target? I got shit to buy.
Exactly. His whole thing was like what he was doing was not illegal because he did have this disclaimer and it clearly said his name and had his address. Like it wasn't his fault if people cut it off and leaving just a perfectly serviceable banknote. Like
but even
freedom.
if it were, it's an enemy nation. Who's going to sue him?
Exactly. Yeah. By April, Upham's fakes began appearing in Richmond, Virginia, which I don't know if you knew was the capital of the Confederacy.
Oh, I didn't actually know that.
So they were not a little mad. They were big mad.
Sure.
Like they were so upset. This is where their Treasury Department was. Mm-hmm. So, you know, these phony bills come rolling up into their area and they're just like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
So they warned the Richmond Daily Dispatch, which was the biggest newspaper in Richmond, to just let the public know that, hey, there's a lot of fake money out here. Like, be careful. So this is a quote from their dispatch. It says, "This note is well calculated to deceive, and in nearly every particular is a facsimile of the original." They called these fakes Yankee scoundrelism, examples of Yankee scoundrelism. I'm like, I fucking love that term. The paper later found one of Upham's banknotes with his name and address still attached.
Oh.
Ooh, this is when shit hits the fan. This is a quote. "Who is this man Upham? A knave swindler and forger of the most depraved and despicable sort." In an ad published in May, he claimed to have sold already at this point 500,000 banknotes.
So he fucked up by what he was doing to try and protect himself. He fucked up.
Yes, he now had 14 different varieties of Confederate currency. Get this. Whew. This motherfucker started taking mail orders.
It's like, sure, I can ship this to
crime
Georgia
via post, like
yes.
bold shit, like wild. So for 50 cents plus 18 cents in postage, customers throughout the Union could have 100 of Upham's notes delivered to their doorstep. The biggest sellers was, of course, $100 bills because they cost no more than a $1 or $5 bill. It's all the same paper.
Oh.
Yes. So people are buying a lot of money. And this is when he knew, I think he knew the whole time, but he started referring to his inventory as paper bullets.
I'm surprised the government didn't be like, look what this dude is doing. We're going to do this too.
The government is coming into the story very, very soon. So, the South is fucking pissed.
Yeah.
They were convinced that Upham was part of a government plot to devalue the Confederate dollar.
I mean, what a great way
right?
to attack your enemy during war.
And they pointed to the fact that he was doing it so boldly in the open, like sending it via post. Like, obviously the government knows.
Putting it in the newspaper. Yeah, this is...
Putting it in the newspaper.
Like, he's not even trying to hide it.
No.
And literally devaluing an enemy nation's currency.
Yep. They were convinced that he'd been given permission by the government or even support in his campaign to tank their economy. Because that's what he was doing. Union troops spent counterfeit cash everywhere they went. So they were in the North. They bought all this shit and then they moved south.
Oh.
So according to a Virginia paper, they said that the fact that like all of these troops are just spending all this fake money, that this proved a, quote, deep-laid scheme on the part of the thieving, counterfeiting North to undermine the Confederate currency.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Amazing. So in the summer of 1862, Upham's notes had taken over the market of Northern Virginia. There's more Confederate dollars than real dollars in Northern Virginia.
Wow.
Yes. So brought by the Union forces, because they were marching south from Washington. So a Southern journalist observed that Union soldiers were just buying everything.
Of course.
Some of them bought horses. Some of them, but also regular mundane things like sugar and tobacco. And they were getting real money for change.
Oh my God. Oh.
Yes.
I didn't even think about that.
Yes, right? So
yes,
good.
Of course.
So the Dispatch, the paper in Richmond, is just like going off. They said that the counterfeits appeared wherever the execrable Yankee soldiers polluted the soil with his cloven foot. So these bills traveled as far south as New Orleans and as far west as Arkansas.
Wow.
Yeah, all over. Carried by Union soldiers who used them to purchase supplies. Almost exclusively use them to just buy shit.
Sure. Why would you use your own money when you could
Exactly.
buy money?
When you can buy money in large quantities.
For nothing.
For nothing and get stuff.
Pennies on the dollar and then go fucking...
However, some of the biggest customers were Southerners who secretly came up and ordered fake money.
Of course.
And then went back down south of the Mason-Dixon.
That's not surprising in any way. I would do the same if I were in the South.
There were a lot of smugglers, too, who were paid by the businesses in New York and bigger centers that was making clothing. They hired smugglers to go down there, buy cotton and fake money, and come back with their cotton because there was that blockade.
Sure.
Yeah. It wasn't hidden.
Yeah.
This was not like a secret plot. Eventually, President Davis, he put a $10,000 bounty on Upham's head.
Wow.
Because dude, again, had his name and address. He was not being slick at all. He threatened to hang all counterfeiters if caught. So the bounty is what flagged it with the U.S. government. Because I guess they were too busy fighting the war to really even notice that, like, hey, there's a dude in Philly who's just, like, making money and sending it all over the country. So federal investigators showed up at his door because, again, he had his name and address on these bills. Mm-hmm. It was no secret. And yeah, as fractured as the nation was, the U.S. government could not turn a blind eye to someone who is printing their own money and sending it everywhere. Their biggest issue was they were afraid that the South would retaliate, thinking that Upham was working for them and like start making greenbacks and like flooding our market with like fake currency. But also they were worried that, okay, he's making Southern currency. Is he making Northern currency too? Like, is that what he's doing and shipping this stuff all over the place? So they showed up, they asked him questions, and, Upham had answers. I feel like he was probably rehearsing this whole time.
Like, I'm not printing.
So when they heard that he wasn't making Union money, they're like, okay. But what he was doing was still kind of on the line. Like, it was fraudulent, what he was doing. So they kicked his case up to the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton.
I love Edwin Stanton.
Right? He's great. So, according to him, he was fucking cool with it. He's like, he hasn't broken any law. The Confederacy is by definition illegal. So, fuck him.
Exactly.
So, some historians, I don't know, there's a bit of debate After this meeting of Stanton and Upham, some say that Stanton gave him like material support.
Oh.
After this, I read it in some articles, but then not in others. But by that summer, like after this meeting, his counterfeits were better quality. Mm-hmm. So some people said that Stanton had given him official banknote paper that was seized by the Union.
Amazing.
Right? So,
good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. So he continued forging these Confederate, like, funny money until August of that year, until he was no longer making money. Because, like you said, the value of the Confederate dollar was nothing.
Yeah.
It had fallen so low that even smugglers weren't fucking with it.
Sure.
Like, the word progressed to a point where everyone knew the South was going to lose. So it's just like, why bother? Yeah. Why bother with this money that no one's taking right now?
Yeah.
Within 18 months, he had dropped the value. I mean, not just him, but like the value of the Confederate dollar had dropped 90%.
What an American hero.
Thank you. That's what I said. A counterfeiter we all can get down with.
Yes.
So a pound of tea in Virginia costs $35, which in today's money is $1,600. Oh. A barrel of flour back then was $1,000 because of the crazy inflation, which is $32,000 for flour. Like, that's how low
Their
it was.
Currency was just worth nothing.
Nothing.
Amazing.
Worse than nothing. I mean, it wasn't just Upham who, collapsed their economy. There was a lot of mismanagement of Southern funds.
Sure.
There was lots. It's because every state was printing their own money and there was just runaway inflation.
Sure.
But Upham's impact was significant. It was later estimated that he had produced $15 million worth of Confederate bills. And if all of that ended up in the South, it would have been 3% of the total money supply.
Wow.
So a Mississippi senator said at the time that Upham had done more to damage the Confederacy than the Union Army. Right?
I love this story.
So when Upham died, he died in 1885. He was only 66. He left like a lot to his estate because, he had been making that money. So a few decades later in 1893, Harper's Encyclopedia, like the famous encyclopedia, they published a picture of a genuine Confederate note. It was Upham's. That's how ubiquitous they were. They were everywhere.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and that's how good they were. Nowadays, there's still a market for Confederate currency, but I like to think that there's some like rich racist asshole like buying a fake.
In things, yeah.
Yeah, the end.
I would rather buy one of Upham's
than
the real thing.
Yeah.
That's what I want. I want the fake that's like beautiful, but also, was like helping take down the Confederacy.
Yep.
Now I'm like, can I go on YouTube? Can I go on eBay and buy an Upham dollar?
I don't know. Probably.
Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that fun?
I
felt like this story was not like heavy enough.
It's incredible.
But like I heard it in passing on a podcast where I hear everything and I'm just like, what? This guy did what? And when I looked into it, I'm like, oh my God, 3% of their whole money supply was coming from Philadelphia. Like this guy.
Well, I hope that Upham was drinking some of this fantastic punch because I certainly need another glass. Yeah. I finished mine.
Oh shit!
Like
damn.
Immediately.
Wow.
It's so good.
It is very drinkable.
Well, BRB.
Yeah.
So, have you ever thought about what would happen if your airline window popped out?
Or if you can build a jetpack using only machine guns.
Well, we found out you could, but you really shouldn't. Hi, I'm Jill Chacha.
And I'm Marissa Riley.
Together, we have one comedy science-y show called, well, That's Interesting.
It's for folks who like to learn about weird stuff, like how hair can grow between your teeth and what happens if the moon disappears.
If you need a break from the world or need interesting stuff to bring up at a party when those happen again, come on by.
Find Well That's Interesting wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
And we're back with fresh, warm punches.
Yes. It's a little too drinkable.
Yeah,
I'm
it's very drinkable.
I'm feeling a little anxiety. I'm like, is this like the monkey gland?
No, and actually the nice thing about it is that depending on what size cup you put it in, like the bigger the cup is, the more hot water you add. So you can dilute it down however you want.
I love it.
Yeah, it just says this much brandy, this much rum, top with hot water.
Oh, I I love it.
Yeah.
It's like you can make it to your taste.
On that note, let me take another sip first before I get into this.
I can pretend that it's medicinal.
Today, I'm going to be revisiting McCarthyism. Hooray!
Yay.
You can't tell because she's not wearing her hair beads today, but she just shook her head. But I'm actually not going to be talking about communism or communists. Instead, I'm going to be talking about another sinister threat that all Americans could get behind hating in the 1950s. Everybody hated this other group. And just like we did with the communists, during the McCarthy era, this other group was also targeted as a security threat by the U.S. government, leading to investigations and mass firings and basic rejection from society. So do you want to take a stab at who this other group might be that was like a government boogeyman?
Jewish people?
Gay people.
Oh.
Yes. Oh. Big, scary, dangerous gay people.
It's big gay.
Yes.
You know?
Oh, so today, I love big gay. I need a sip.
Oh, no. I'm already so sad.
So today I'm going to be talking about a little known chapter from American history known as the Lavender Scare.
Okay.
Have you heard of the Lavender Scare?
Just that word.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know nothing about what it is.
Yeah. Before I get into it, I would like to propose a toast. So raise a glass to living out loud and proud, and to learning that there is more to gay pride than just rainbows on Mickey Mouse pajamas.
How dare you? I recently sent Tux this program that we're doing for Target at my job that is just rainbows. Everything is co-opted by capitalism. Mm-hmm. They defang any movement with real power and sell it back to you.
Yeah, this started as a movement, and now it's a way to make money.
PJs.
Yeah, exactly.
It started as a riot, and now it's PJs.
Mm-hmm. So, during the progressive Roosevelt years, there were, in certain circles, especially in urban areas, there was this sort of unspoken tolerance of gays and lesbians. And we've already spoken on the show before about Eleanor Roosevelt and her friend Lorena Hickok, and the fact that it was basically a very poorly kept secret that Lorena Hickok was an open lesbian, and that it may even have been that she was having some sort of a romantic relationship with the First Lady. But the thing is, these kinds of open secrets were actually really common back in the 30s and 40s. In those years, there were actually vibrant and open gay communities in many cities throughout the United States, including in Washington, D.C. There were gay bars, there were, gay hangout spots. And it was kind of nobody really was this is where the gay bar is unless you knew, but it was happening and it was fine. Between the Great Depression and the war, there were a lot of new government jobs opening up and military jobs because the war was about to start after the Great Depression. So gay people were leaving their sort of small towns, their close-knit conservative communities, and moving to the big city because, it's easier to be gay in a city. It just is. That's just, it sucks that you don't want to be gay in fucking bumfuck Ohio.
Well,
but
it's an aggregator. There's safety in numbers.
Exactly, yeah. So a lot of gay people basically just followed the jobs. They were following these new government jobs and military jobs, and they were moving to D.C. and other port cities that had military bases. Government jobs provided excellent pay and good benefits. And in cities, it's easier to be yourself because there's this certain level of anonymity. For example, we're friends with our neighbor across the hall, but we don't really know the people upstairs. Mm-hmm. So it's easy to kind of be hiding in plain sight, basically, in a city. And especially in D.C., this was very common. Same-sex couples were seen holding hands on the trolley in Washington, D.C., and kissing on the grounds of the Washington Monument in the 30s and 40s. But just because gay people were starting to live their lives sort of more out in the open in the late 1940s, that didn't mean that the rest of the country was cool with it. In the late 40s, the war was over and the economy was doing really well. So they needed to find a new villain, a new scapegoat.
Yes.
And society, without someone to kind of look down on and blame, society kind of developed this like weird, like film noir fascination with subversive subcultures and with sex crimes. People were obsessed with sex crimes. And I've seen so many movies from the late 40s about like a crime based around like a violent, yeah.
I know true crime was really big in the 30s.
Yeah, it was sex crimes as entertainment, basically. Yeah. In 1948, Alfred Kinsey published Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, and it became a bestseller. But now people were starting to realize just how many gay people were actually living amongst them. And that led to basically more actively fearing and hating gay people because they realized like, oh, like my neighbor could be gay. That's not cool. You know what I mean? Like I could be talking to a gay person and not even know it.
You can't hear my disgust.
So a few factors started coming together in the late 1940s that led to what became known as the Lavender Scare. First of all, that term is named after a term that a lot of politicians used to use back then to refer to gay men in the State Department. Lavender lads.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you know that lavender was like the color of
it's
gayness?
like, it's just like, it's a feminine color associated to a man.
It's
so
my dad's favorite
gay.
Color, purple. But he's,
yeah.
foreign.
I mean, today, if it was like Turd Cruz trying to bash gay people, it would be pink. But you know what I mean?
He's a stereotype.
Yeah. But back then, yeah, it was lavender.
Okay. Because women are the worst.
Yeah. It's a feminine color.
Misogyny.
Exactly. Yeah. Throughout the entire country, a lot of states and cities.
It's a feminine color here. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Not globally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like light purple, you know what I mean?
Maybe it's just African culture, but like the more you're supposed to be basically a peacock.
Oh,
and
sure.
And like African and in a lot of Latin American countries, like the men are almost the most beautiful.
Sure.
And I think Asian culture as well. This is an American thing.
100%. I mean, we've always used
a Western thing.
Color as like a coded way to.
Yeah.
It's garbage. We are garbage. Yay.
Facts.
So throughout the United States, in a lot of states and even certain cities had their own laws. They were passing across the country. They were passing these anti-sodomy laws called sexual psychopath laws. And in 1948, Congress passed an act, quote, for the treatment of sexual psychopaths in D.C. This law labeled D.C.'s homosexuals as mentally ill and allowed D.C.'s police to arrest and punish anyone who they caught acting on same-sex desire. So this idea that homosexuality is a mental illness was very common back then. In fact, the American Psychological Association like officially adopted that belief.
Oh, yeah,
that
it was
part
the DCM.
Yeah.
Until I don't even know when.
In the 70s. It changed, yeah. So after the war, almost immediately after the war, the military started this campaign to actively root out homosexuals in the military using a series of psychological screenings because certain people thought that if gay people are mentally ill, that means they're not fit to serve. So these screenings were based on garbage. It's pseudoscience, stereotypes, and guesses rather than actual science. And at first, at least, they were actually really ineffective because so little was understood. I can't even imagine what the questions they would have been asking.
He smells too nice.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't believe him.
Yeah.
I don't believe him.
Yeah.
He doesn't smell like farts. Get him out of here.
Something's wrong with him. So in 1947, the U.S. Park Police launched an anti-cruising campaign known as a sex perversion elimination program. This was started in D.C., but eventually it spread to other cities throughout the United States. And basically anyone who was in a park at night could be deemed suspicious and picked up and arrested, regardless of what they were doing there. It didn't matter what your intentions were. If you were suspicious because you were in a park at night, you were arrested, intimidated, and made to pay fines before you could go home, but not before your information was collected, including fingerprints and photographs that would be added to a police pervert file. Hundreds of men were arrested, and these campaigns just kept getting increasingly harsh throughout the 1950s. It got to a point where the police were actively entrapping gay men so that they could be arrested. Men have all different professions and all different walks of life were arrested in this program. But a lot of the men in D.C. especially were sort of young government clerks. And at that time, if you had an arrest record and you were a federal employee, that could mean that it would lead to being fired because you had an arrest record as a federal employee. So then in 1950, the Senate Appropriations Committee passed an amendment to the State Department's appropriations bill called the McCarran Rider. And this allowed the Secretary of State to, quote, to dismiss any employee at his absolute discretion if he deemed such action advisable in the interest of national security. Now, this was, the McCarran Rider was obviously being used to target communists. That I think it was probably designed for communists, but it didn't take long for them to weaponize it against gay people too, because a lot of conservatives believed that gay people were just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than communists.
Anyone who thinks different
is
a problem
absolutely.
here.
Yeah.
And anyone who thinks that, maybe all people should be able to live freely is a communist. So it's...
Totally.
These gays don't even know that they're communists.
Yeah, exactly.
By their standards,
So one such person who believed that gays were just as dangerous, if not more dangerous than communists was...
J. Edgar.
Joseph McCarthy.
Oh.
Our boy Joseph McCarthy. Okay. So I talked about the Hollywood blacklist before, and I talked about how Joseph McCarthy had his meteoric rise to fame after he gave this speech in 1950 claiming that he had a list of 205 names of known communists working in the State Department. What I didn't mention before is that when he went and spoke on the Senate floor about a week later to give more specifics on this mostly made up list of names, 2 of the cases that he discussed with Congress were homosexuals. He used these 2 cases as a way to link homosexuality and communists in the mind of Congress. And he claimed that gay people had, quote, peculiar mental twists that made them more susceptible to communistic recruitment.
They said the same thing about black people.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Anyone who's different, exactly like you just said.
Anyone who's different who wants to be treated the same.
So just over a week later, the State Department announced that they had just removed 91 homosexual employees because they were deemed security risks. This mass firing coming right after McCarthy's speeches led to a media frenzy. And then there was a public outcry against the security threat of gay federal employees. During this time, political rhetoric increasingly linked communists and queers, and people started believing the most wild things about the similarities between these 2 groups. Stuff was printed and people were like, apparently it's true because it was in the newspaper, so it must be true. Both groups were thought to be morally weak and psychologically disturbed. Both were thought to be godless atheists. Both undermined the traditional family.
Oh, yes.
Yes, we can't have that.
No.
Both groups were assumed to recruit new members. They really believed, they were certain that gay people were out here in these streets being like, you're a young man. Do you want to come? I'll touch yours if you touch mine.
Have you heard of gayness? What?
Nobody's doing this by choice. Members of both groups were assumed to be shadowy figures who belonged to a secret subculture. I want to belong to a secret subculture.
They just sound really jealous. That's all I'm hearing is jealousy.
They don't have to have kids. They don't have to go to church.
Right? They don't have to pay for some expensive-ass kids. They can just have all the sex.
They don't have to buy these Nikes every 6 months.
Yeah. I like that they were worried about, the Nike lines
back
then.
So one of the most common reasons that they believed that gay people were dangerous to national security was that basically there's so much shame and secrecy, especially then, that surrounds homosexuality and being a homosexual, that they thought that gay people were especially susceptible to blackmail. And that made them...
Because they probably were, right?
They wouldn't have been if it was okay for them to be okay.
Obviously, yeah.
So they believed that if gay people had access to government information, that they would give up classified secrets to foreign enemy agents to avoid being publicly outed and keeping their sexual orientation a secret from their neighbors and friends and family. McCarthy said outright, homosexuals must not be handling top secret material. The pervert is easy prey to the blackmailer. After several investigations over the course of many years, not a single case was ever found where even one homosexual gave up government secrets to avoid being outed. It didn't fucking happen.
I am not shocked.
Yeah. But unlike the hunt for communists, that wasn't really turning up any real, solid, concrete evidence, actual homosexuals were being discovered, were confessing to being gay, and were being fired. And this just led to further investigations. It fueled the fire. It was basically like chum in the water.
Yeah.
They could smell blood, and they're like, hell yes, we're not getting any communists, so let's get these queers instead.
And I'm guessing the people that they got were forced to like rat on other people.
Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
of course.
They basically used all the same tactics that they were using against communists. Totally textbook. So 1 month after McCarthy's speech, these two senators got together and they were like, you know what? We need to start an investigation because we need to do something about all these queers in the government. We need to stop this. So they start this investigation, and the head of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department's Vice Squad comes and testifies before them and tells them that 5,000 homosexuals are living in D.C. and about 3,700 of them were federal employees. He had no proof to back this up. After he said this in this investigation, the press went wild. People went nuts. And by June, the Senate was convinced that an even larger investigation was needed. So they shut down this two-senator investigation and opened a new one. And the second investigation was called the Hoey Committee, named after the committee's chairman, Senator Clyde Hoey. It was a bipartisan investigation. I think there were 6 subcommittee members, 3 of whom were Democrat, 3 of whom were Republican.
Okay.
But Senator McCarthy was also closely tied to this investigation and sometimes even forwarded information about suspected homosexuals. So they gathered information from federal agencies, from law enforcement and judicial authorities, and at the committee's formal hearings, the Intelligence Committee was especially well represented. They even asked the director of the CIA if it was possible to start a master database of identified homosexuals and asked him to consider whether a special agency should be created to deal with them.
What?
What are you going to do with them? To do
for what? To get them all fired and then what? Whatever. Yeah, it's so stupid. I can't.
So they also interviewed...
It just sounds like they're really bored.
I know.
You know, this was like before spreadsheets. Like they didn't have a lot of things to do before TikTok. They
had graph paper. They were like...
Yes. Like, what?
They also interviewed several prominent psychiatrists and medical authorities to ask whether homosexuals could be detected through psychiatric examination, whether and how they could be cured, and whether they lacked the emotional stability necessary for government service.
Because straight men are so emotionally stable.
Come on.
They never have outbursts that are violent, ever.
Never. Unfortunately for them, these medical professionals were not really giving them the answers that they wanted to hear. Most of them basically said...
They're living in a fact-based world?
Know,
what?
Yeah. Most of them were like, you know what? Sexuality is fluid.
Burn them.
Homosexuality is a spectrum. One said, homosexuality is not an entity. There are all shades and gradations.
They don't want to hear that.
No, they did not want to hear that. So another one of these doctors went ahead and emphasized the role of social connections and community on a person's mental state and stability.
What do you mean?
If you have community versus if you're like living in fear of being found out and you're not talking to anyone and you don't have any friends, you're going to be a different person. And,
absolutely, yeah.
I'm
community is nourishing.
Exactly. Yeah. So he was saying like, I know of thousands of perfectly well-adjusted gay men and lesbians who have perfectly normal social lives and professional lives and do their jobs perfectly well and there's nothing to worry about. But if you're going to make them live in fear
Yeah.
Of course they're going to be
Yeah.
like a mess.
Yeah, if you're making them traumatized,
Exactly.
coming into work every day, 5 days a week, they're going to be a different person.
But you're making this worse intentionally and then trying to blame them for it. But they didn't want to hear all that.
No.
So these answers were far too nuanced and progressive for this committee. And one member...
How dare they seek out experts?
I know, exactly. Yeah. One member actually got frustrated and asked one of the doctors, so there's no like quick X-ray test that discloses these things?
No, bitch.
An X-ray?
Are you dumb?
A gay ray?
What?
It's like, but don't you have medical...
I like that this is like 1950,
Yeah.
but they're like, do you have a gay ray?
Exactly. Do you have gaydar? Like medical gaydar?
Fuck off.
Yes. And
Wow.
obviously the doctors were like,
We didn't even have the internet, and they're asking for gaydar.
seriously.
Get out of here.
Can't you just scan them with your gaydar and be done with this? So the answer was no, obviously. And so the committee basically, when they went to write their reports, they just ignored all of the testimony of the medical community.
It's inconvenient truth.
Yes, exactly. So the Hoey Committee's report, Employment of Homosexuals and Other Sex Perverts in Government, concluded that gay people should not be employed by the federal government because they are generally unsuitable. Quote, unquote, generally unsuitable.
That is so vague.
According to the committee, indulgence in acts of sex perversion weakens the moral fiber of an individual to a degree that he is not suitable for a position of responsibility.
I like that straight white men are the portrait of morality somehow. Mm-hmm. Excuse me?
Yeah, you can go home and like beat your wife.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
But you're moral because you're beating a woman?
No big deal.
Make it make sense. Make it make sense.
So the Hoey report was highly influential and actually shaped government security manuals for decades.
Well, because they heard what they wanted to believe. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The biggest impact of this report, though, was that it ultimately led President Dwight Eisenhower to sign an executive order in 1953 that added sexuality to the list of criteria used to determine suitability for federal employment. So that meant, basically, with a stroke of a pen, the President of the United States had effectively banned gay people from all jobs in the U.S. government.
Wow.
The nation's largest employer.
I did not. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did not know this.
Yes, in 1953. More than 1,000 federal agents were assigned to find and expose potential
Don't they
gay
have
employees.
real government work to be doing?
Right?
Is this your job? Like
I
turning.
am government gaydar.
I said this during the Red Scare episode, but what they're doing, it's like out of their playbook to turn people on each other and like create this atmosphere of fear where everyone feels like they have to be looking at their neighbor suspiciously.
Mm-hmm. But because this was actually successful and they were finding actual gay employees in the U.S.
How
government
do they
and in the
know
military,
that they were finding actual gay people though?
they were admitting it.
They were admitting it. Okay.
Yeah, after being pressed and outed by their friends, and they were admitting it.
Yeah.
Some of them were fired, some of them resigned, but yeah. Because people were actually being outed and because they were actually being discovered, this was actually
That's even worse though.
one of the most successful witch hunts in American history.
Oh wow.
The most, if
Wow.
not the most
Yeah.
successful witch hunt in American history.
Because with communists, like so much of what they were saying was just like hearsay upon
Exactly.
hearsay.
Yeah.
Like someone like read a pamphlet and like because of that, or they were a member 15 years prior.
Absolutely. Yeah, but gay people were in this place. You have to understand like what it was like to be a gay
Yeah.
person in the 1950s. You were just terrified that
course.
if they told your parents, if they told your
Yeah.
neighbors, your life would be destroyed. If you were suspected and the government came at you saying like, they would just be like, I'm out.
Instantly, yeah,
Goodbye.
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Because it's like you're living under such fear.
Exactly.
That
Yeah.
the minute someone shines a light on you, you crack.
All throughout the 1950s and 60s and even into the 70s, and some people would even argue 80s and 90s.
Whoa.
Officially, this law was overturned in the 70s, but it didn't really fully end
Yeah, I
until
mean, that's
the 90s.
always how things happen. It's like it's not really illegal anymore, but
Yeah.
there's still a culture of kind of criminalizing
Yeah,
that.
federal employees were subject to official investigations, and they were
Wait,
asked...
this is something that you hear about in like Mother Russia.
Totally. But yeah, they were asked questions like, do you identify as a homosexual? Have you ever had same-sex sexual relations? Who do you live with?
Wait, this was just for men.
No.
okay.
It started with men, but no, it most certainly was not just for men. Who do you live with? Who are your friends? What bars do you frequent? Would you like us to call your family back home and ask these questions?
Oh my God.
Yes. And as you've already asked, they were obviously asked to give up names of all other known gays and lesbians in their social circle.
Unfortunately, get the heat off of you. And it's so insidious. And like, people make shit up all the time.
Yeah.
Because you're not doing anything other than being yourself. So you're just like, it's so rattling.
Yeah, 100%.
To be called out by the federal government in this way.
Many people just chose to resign rather than...
That's probably what I would do.
Yeah, they didn't want to face these continuing investigations.
Yeah, I would probably... I don't know if there were, like, copiers back then.
Copiers?
You know,
like copy machines?
Like, that you could, like, just copy your butt cheeks and then quit.
I was like, where are you going with this?
Because they're going to fire you anyways.
Yeah.
Might as well, like...
Here's my resignation letter.
Yeah, because it's like my career in the government is over. Like, now you get to see my butt cheeks.
Yeah.
You know? Fuck it.
Yeah, people were just terrified, and they were like, okay, I don't want them to call my family back home.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just drop out before they continue this and push this any further because I can't have this happening to me.
Yeah.
Recently, there was a documentary made about the Lavender Scare a few years ago, and the filmmaker reached out to some of the interviewers who were part of this investigation, who held these investigations, and asked them if they regretted what they had done, and almost none of them said yes. Most of them were like, no, I was just doing my job. I was doing what the president asked me to do. One of them said, the people that I got rid of, they were faggots. I didn't give a hoot. Get rid of the son of a bitch. Put him in the breadline.
Okay. Well, I hate that man.
Yes.
What year are you living in, sir?
Apparently still in 1950.
Yeah. This makes me want to be a journalist so I can just like curse people out.
Right. Right.
It's like I'm not even writing a story, but I'm just like interviewing bigots.
Yes. Hello, this is Stephanie calling from the Bushwick Bigot Destroyer. So official records state that roughly around 1,000 federal employees were fired because of their sexuality during this era. But that number does not take into account the number of people who were bullied or blackmailed into leaving their position. Yeah. The people who resigned because they wanted to avoid public humiliation.
Mm-hmm. They wanted to keep their families.
Yeah. So historians believe that number is actually much closer to 5,000 or 10,000 people. 10,000 people.
Wow.
I mean, there's no real way to know for sure, but whether they were fired or coerced into resigning, these victims lost their jobs, they lost their homes, they lost their communities. The gay community was destroyed, especially in D.C. People left. People were terrified.
Yeah.
Didn't want to go to the gay bar in case they were caught. And they were under intense emotional stress and isolation.
Yeah.
And just like before, during the Hollywood Blacklist story, suicide was very common at this point. One historian said, I saw lots of newspaper reports of single young men, government employees who committed suicide in Washington for no apparent reason. Because the newspaper is not going to report on why.
Yeah.
And actually, at this point, the State Department was sometimes even actively covering up the reasons for suicides. They knew what they were doing, and they didn't want people to find out. Like in the case of Andrew Ference, a State Department employee who was working at the U.S. Embassy in Paris. He was detained by security officers in 1954 and subjected...
They caught him in Paris?
In Paris.
That's so
He spoke
rude.
something like 7 languages.
That's so rude. Yeah, I mean, it's truly their loss.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
100%.
They're losing all
absolutely.
of these really qualified people just because of who they are.
Exactly.
Like,
he was subjected to 2 days of investigation, and finally he admitted he was gay and he was fired. But 4 days later, his partner came back to their apartment and found his body. But then the State Department covered the whole thing up and told his family that he had killed himself because he was worried about health problems. They didn't want them to know that he was fired or that he had been subject to an investigation.
That they had been the reason for his death?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So obviously there are a lot of parallels between the Red Scare and the Lavender Scare.
Yeah.
There's so many similarities, but one major difference in this case is that there were actually no public hearings or prison sentences.
There were no public hearings?
No, which is a good thing because...
Is it though?
No one was subjected to this like public humiliation in the way that they were with the Red Scare. Okay. However, no one was ever seen as a victim. The government didn't want to take these cases to trial. They just wanted to fire these people and move on because they thought the whole subject was embarrassing. This was taboo.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I get that, I guess.
But then gay people, unlike communists had a political agenda that they were trying to push. Gay people just wanted to move on with their lives.
Yeah.
They didn't want the spotlight.
Yeah.
So they didn't want to go to trial.
So it was better.
So it probably
Whereas
saved...
communists were just like, yeah, take me to trial. Like, I am innocent.
I have nothing fucking to
yeah,
hide.
like, let's do this. Like, I'm ready.
Exactly. So it definitely saved lives, and there were a lot of suicides, but there would have been a lot more if there had been public trials.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there were no real human beings being seen as victims, and that's probably at least part of the reason that nobody even knows about the Lavender Scare. So few people have even heard of this. These weren't seen as real people. They were a concept. They're a boogeyman.
Yeah. They were abnormal. They were this small percentage of people.
It wasn't your neighbor. It wasn't your friend. It was just the gay.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Boogeyman.
Fortunately, today, because historians are finally starting to talk about this and documentaries are being made, books are being written, the victims of the Lavender Scare are finally starting to step forward.
Yeah, because they're still alive.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, they're still alive.
Yeah.
Like, they should be able to tell their story. And it's so disappointing that these investigators have no remorse. Like,
it's really disturbing that it is 2021 and they are like, no, it's cool.
I feel like if you can't tell the truth in your 80s, like, what are you
No, I
doing?
know. What have you got to lose? You're going to die anyways.
Yeah.
Sorry to say that.
I mean,
but like,
it's not that you're going to die anyways. It's just like, what do you have to prove to anyone?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
who cares? You're not employed anymore.
Yeah.
You're not protecting
Like,
anyone.
Just be honest.
This goes back to the whole thing of like not wanting to admit that you've made a mistake. Being defensive.
You're right.
This
Especially men.
Yeah, exactly. This was government policy.
Men,
I was just doing what I was told to do.
That is a mindset that a lot of people still have. It is hard to make mistakes, but you have to be self-aware enough, and they're not self-aware enough
100%.
to be honest about it. But it's like the truth will set you free.
Yeah.
And you know what you did.
Yeah. So finally, some of the victims are starting to step forward and tell their stories. Like Airman Second Class Helen Grace James, who has talked openly about the fact that she was followed and watched during her days in the Air Force, even while she was doing things like mundane ass things like eating a sandwich with a friend or even going to the bathroom. She was followed while she was going to the bathroom. She said that the feeling of constant scrutiny started to affect her mental health.
Of course it did.
And her
it makes
sleep.
you feel crazy.
Yeah. She said we were scared all the time.
Yeah.
She said that when she was arrested in 1955, the Army threatened to go to her parents and her friends.
That's so fucked up.
Yeah. They told her that she was a threat to the nation and a bad person. She said, I finally said, just write down whatever you want to write down and I'll sign it. Just get off of me. Get away from me. And she was kind of like, after that, she didn't have any sorts of income. This is what happened to everyone.
Yeah.
You know, and she couldn't go to her family. She couldn't tell them what happened.
Yeah.
According to one historian, especially in the military, female service members were actually targeted at higher rates than male service members probably because women were seen as being gender deviant for wanting to be in the military in the first place.
Oh, of course. Mm-hmm. It's like you're in the military and you're not going to sleep with me?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Get
100%.
the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense.
I think that was much more common in the military than government jobs, federal jobs, but yeah.
There's so much harassment and sexual violence against women in the military. And like they're able to tell their stories now, but it's like the military still does them dirty in like such a massive way. Yeah.
It's 2021 and you're still hearing stories about women being attacked and
like being demoted for telling someone.
And it's a boys' club, so if a woman is sexually assaulted and then comes forward, the men are protected and she's exactly.
She was asking for it. What was a man to do? I'm gonna take a sip.
Please do.
Because I need to drown out the massage.
Fortunately, I can say that actually some good did come out of this story in a way
because I am so angry right now.
So this was happening well over a decade before Stonewall. And these purges from these federal jobs were actually creating a sense of outrage in the gay community that helped start what at the time back then was called the homophile movement. like the gay rights movement, basically, before it used to be called the homophile movement. It helped bring about the founding of some of the earliest gay rights organizations, like the Mattachine Society in 1950 and the Daughters of Bilitis in 1955.
Okay.
And then in 1957, a man named Dr. Frank Kameny, who was a Harvard PhD working as an astronomer for the U.S. Army Map Service, was fired after being arrested in San Francisco for lewd conduct at a San Francisco tea room. But unlike the thousands who had gone away quietly before him, he actually fought back.
Good.
After he was fired, he was not able to find another position in his field that didn't require security clearance. And he was like, I have studied and worked my fucking ass off to get where I am, and you're taking all of that away from me.
I just wish these people, this is fucked up for me to say, but like, I just wish that they went to like enemy nations.
Seriously?
Like,
yeah.
like it's like, I have this information. I am trying to help this country, and you are working against your own interests right now.
100%. That's the whole thing is like,
you're a dummy.
If you didn't do this, people wouldn't be afraid in the first place, and blackmail wouldn't even be a problem. Not that it even was to begin with. But so he was basically like, you've taken everything from me. I can't get a job. Fuck it. What have I got to lose? So he decided to appeal his dismissal. And he just kept on appealing his dismissal up the line. Every appeal was denied. Years later, he said, I took that as a declaration of war against me and my fellow gays, and became the first person, to my knowledge, to fight back on this issue.
Yeah.
He kept on appealing all the way to the Supreme Court. And in his petition to the court, he said, he called... I love him.
You saw him first,
Yes.
I guess.
He called the government's policies on homosexuality, quote, nothing more than a reflection of ancient, primitive, archaic, obsolete taboos, an anachronistic relic of the Stone Age carried over into the Space Age.
Tell them.
Yes.
Tell them.
But surprise, surprise, the Supreme Court denied his appeal as well.
Supreme Court's garbage.
Fuck this. Yeah. But that didn't stop him. In 1961, he co-founded the Washington, D.C. chapter of the Mattachine Society, one of the first ever gay rights organizations ever.
In this country.
Yes.
Yeah.
He went on to co-found, join, or lead several other prominent gay rights organizations over the course of his life. In 1965, he organized picket lines in front of the State Department and the White House.
I love it.
And when the news showed up, he told CBS News, every American citizen has the right to be considered by his government on the basis of his own personal merits as an individual.
Tell them. I think a lot of people do realize this, but I'm saying this for the people who don't know. The civil rights fight that we're doing right now, it's not for us.
Yeah.
It is not for us. We are doing this for the future. We are doing this for our great grandkids. Even if we don't have kids, we are doing this because it's the right thing to do. Even if we don't see change.
It's for the generations that come after.
Hundreds of years.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Like, yeah. And it sounds like that's what he was doing.
100%.
Yeah.
And it's sad because
a revolutionary. He is a revolutionary.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of, especially young gay men, don't do enough to learn their gay history. Yeah. And gay history isn't taught in schools.
It's not taught in schools. So it's like, I feel the same way about Black history because, again, they only teach slavery in schools. Yeah. They only teach the things that like make us look bad. There are so many revolutionaries that we don't learn about.
No, nobody's heard of Dr. Frank Kameny. Nobody's heard of this man.
Yeah, no one's heard of Fred Hampton.
Yeah. Hearing
about him and knowing his story is revolutionary.
It is
just
100% revolutionary.
Yeah, I don't fault people who don't know. I just hope eventually they'll be inspired to learn about the movement.
So this picket line that he organized in front of the State Department and the White House, this was 4 years before Stonewall. Wow. This is believed to be the first gay rights demonstration in the country ever. In 1973, his work helped to lead to the removal of homosexuality as a mental disorder from the American Psychiatric Association. And in 1975, his work helped to lead to the revision of federal employment rules that finally allowed gay men and lesbians to work in the federal government in 1975.
1975 is so recent.
Yeah, and he was fired in 1957.
Yeah, he didn't give up.
One historian said, there are few people who contributed as much to the movement as Frank Kameny did. But gay history is not taught in schools, and there hasn't been a huge amount written about him. In terms of his importance, he was the Rosa Parks of the gay rights movement. After 42 years, President Clinton overturned Eisenhower's executive order in 1995. But the government didn't actually apologize for this policy until the Obama administration.
I'm not surprised.
But in 2009, Frank Kameny was invited to the White House by President Obama. He was there for extending the rights of the spouses of gay federal employees for like healthcare or something like that. I'm not positive exactly.
Okay.
So 2 years after Frank Kameny went to the White House, he passed away in 2011.
Okay.
The only other point that I want to make before I wrap this up, because that's the story of the Lavender Scare and Dr. Frank Kameny.
Jesus Christ.
I just want to talk a little bit about the importance of gay pride. And it's easy to look at gay pride today and think it's just fun, it's frivolous, it's go-go boys on parade floats and rainbows and
if you know
confetti.
nothing, but yes.
It's a celebration. And it's easy to think that a celebration is just that. But it's a celebration of the fights that we have fought and how far we have come. And it's easy, if you don't know the history behind it, to just see the celebration and not see the struggle behind it. We are usually between seasons during Pride. We don't do a gay Pride episode because it's in June and we usually take summers off. So I'm just going to say this now. Every year on social media, whether it's a company or a celebrity or whoever, I see these posts about Pride and their support for their gay brothers and sisters.
Yes.
And it's lovely. And I see these, and
They're
I've
saying
seen
all the words, doing
but
all
I have
the
actually
things.
seen some beautiful posts before.
Oh, have you? Okay.
But then you look in the comments and you see some crusty ass comments
Maybe
from some
shame on
salty
you
ass.
for going
I
on
should
into
not
the
read the comments.
comments.
Yeah.
Because...
But these salty ass old white people saying things like,
Jesus Christ.
who cares what gay people do in their bedrooms? Why do I have to see gay people on TV all month long?
Close your eyeballs.
Why can't they just be gay in private? Why do they have to rub it in my face all month long? But this story, this is why we can't be gay behind closed doors.
This is one of the many stories why you can't be gay behind closed doors.
The only reason that we are even seen as human beings today is because of people like Frank Kameny.
Yeah.
Who stopped being gay behind closed doors and started being vocally, unapologetically, militantly, proudly, and loudly gay in public. That's it.
That's real. Yeah. Thank you for that story. I think it's a really important story to tell because especially we don't learn these stories in school at all. And I grew up in a weird situation because even though my mom is from a really small town in Alabama, Tuscaloosa, she grew up on a farm. She moved to Providence when she was in high school. So she lived there through her adulthood, and the woman who did her hair was a trans woman.
Wow.
And like this was in the early 70s.
That's incredible.
Early 70s.
Wow.
My mom was a teen. Early 70s, and she had gotten surgery in Brazil, and it was no big thing.
Yeah.
Like, I think through her, and I do have gay uncles.
The term is gunkles.
I had gunkles. It was just like, there are different sorts of people.
Yeah.
The end.
Literally the end.
Yeah.
I do think that we do a disservice to young people by not teaching gay history.
Yes.
Because there are stories that are important to learn, and they're being withheld because people think that it's immoral to talk about being gay to children when, like, talking about gay history doesn't mean talking about sex.
Thank you.
That
Are
has
people
so
talking
little-
about straight history, talking about sex? No
Nobody's-
one is.
Nobody's over here, like, talking about George Washington had some kinks and, like, you know what I mean? That's not what...
Zero people are talking about that.
Yeah.
It's such a double standard.
Exactly.
And it's so disingenuous to be like, oh, we can't teach kids about this. And it's like, why not?
Because we don't want to, is the bottom line.
Yeah.
And you're using sex as an excuse.
Yeah. It's garbage, and I hate it.
Good times.
But I guess our drinks are empty.
They certainly are.
Maybe have long been empty.
My drink is empty. My bladder, however,
Yes.
is a different story.
So America's history is juicy. We just add brandy and rum and...
Orgeat.
Orgeat, because we's fancy. A little bit of lemon.
We're as
We had-
fancy as a Union general during the Civil War.
We are that fancy. Thank you so much for listening to Beyond Reproach. This has been Stephanie Domingo.
And Tux Lurzl.
Thank you to Tim Clough, our editor, our sound engineer, Podfather. We could not do this without him.
Yes, it's true. We're over here spitting truths.
We are. We are spitting that hot fire, also known as truth.
Yes. Okay, bye.
Bye, guys. Beyond Reproach is proudly recorded in Bushwick, Brooklyn, on land belonging to the Lenape Nation. New episodes are released the first and third Monday of every month. Please note that we are not historians. We are just a couple of drunks who never shut up and love history. Full list of all source information can be found in the show notes on our website. Please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. Written reviews are especially important. If you like us, please do one of two things. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or send this episode to a friend, family member, or someone you think would be into it. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Make sure you follow us on Instagram because we post our cocktail recipes the Thursday before each full episode. Please drink along with us if you are not driving. We also have a shop at beyondreproachpod.com. Get your merch, brand yourselves. We are on Patreon if anyone would love to show us some love and throw us some nickels to support the production of our show.